good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world today. I would like to welcome you to Build This, Not That, part of the GNS Summer Shape-Up series that is focusing on how to turn your website from Flabby to a fit lead generation machine. This is the third in our series of webinars. Before we get started today, just want to give a little bit of administrative points. You can ask a question at any time in the Q&A box in the lower left-hand corners. The questions do come up as private, so you will not see anybody else's question. But you may submit a question at any point during the session, or if you find you're having technical difficulties, please go ahead and submit that in the Q&A. This is a listen-only webinar, so if you're calling in, please put your phone on mute. And we will have a couple of polls during this session, so everybody is welcome to participate in the poll. If you'd like to maximize the screen view, if you click the 4 arrows in the upper right-hand corner, that will maximize the screen. In order to participate in the poll at that point in time, you'll have to hit those 4 arrows to minimize it as well. With that said, I'm Steve Halsey, a Principal and Managing Director here at GNS Business Communications. I am pleased to welcome you to the third in our series. If you missed the previous ones, we started off with looking at paid search and social advertising, really how you could maximize that as part of a very targeted budget. Last week, we had a discussion on how to integrate social into your greater communications program, talking about tying it into events and broader aspects. And today I'm pleased to have Mike Samick join me. Mike is VP of Digital Strategies here at GNS. Extensive experience in marketing, both B2B and B2C standpoint, and he's even authored a 2-year university-level course on web analytics. Mike, welcome to today's webinar.
Thanks, Steve.
So as we look at today, Mike will be our trainer. And for those of you who have been on the previous 2 weeks, you will understand my 4-step guide to getting fit from a digital standpoint. The first and most important aspect is to make sure that you set a tangible goal, that you know where you're going, what are you trying to achieve. To really learn proper techniques from our trainer, and Mike's really going to talk a lot about lead generation and websites and how to structure those today. Make sure you're using analytics and processes to measure your progress, not just so that you can see your progression against that goal, but also so that you have very tangible things to report back to your senior management. And it's important to understand in digital fitness, especially when it comes to website, it's not a one and done sort of thing. You need to stay committed and focused on this on the long run. Quick overview about us as GNS. We've been in business for approximately 45 years. We were founded in 1971 here in New York. We have offices in Raleigh, Chicago, Basel, Switzerland, as well as partners in more than 50 countries around the world. We do both B2B, B2C, and obviously we do a heavy focus on digital media. Mike, I want to start the webinar as we really dive into this by getting your reaction to this. This is not specific to digital, but B2B International recently did a survey at the turn of the year where they asked marketers, what are the biggest challenges that you're trying to solve? And these were kind of interesting to me as they do relate to digital. Building market share, 62%. That one continues to be the #1 role. Retaining customers, increasing brand awareness, countering the competition, improving internal processes, expanding your business into new regions. Mike, how does this have anything to do with a website?
Well, to start, Steve, you're talking about a global marketplace that's a little bit flat, or in some cases has been shrinking over the last few years. So when you look at building market share, when you're talking about protecting your own customer base, and building out that loyalty and trying to keep the customers that you have, the role of the web is very important to customers identifying what it is that you have to offer and what it is that you can do for them.
So you're saying it's more than just having some pretty pictures on the site and some compelling content. And I know you'll get into this in a little bit, but outside of brand awareness, how can a website help counter competitions and even how can it help improve internal processes?
Well, as you'll see, as we go through this a little bit further, what you'll find is that it's the content of the site people are looking for and often not necessarily finding. And so by ensuring that we have the right content in the right place, that's going to go a long way to ensuring that you're keeping people once you've gotten them to your website and preventing them from drifting away toward potentially toward your competitors.
And I know we'll talk a little bit more about the sales funnel and how you can use the website to bring people into the top of the sales funnel, and then depending upon the type of marketing automated system a company may or may not have, how you can use that to create a tailored experience. But I also wanted to get your reaction to this. This was a study that Nielsen fielded last year looking at the most trusted forms of media. Not surprising, recommendations from people that I know was clearly number one, 83%. You have things like consumer opinions posted online, things like Travelocity, things like that. Editorial content that really prize third-party validation of what you're doing is 66%. But when we think about owned media, what surprised me here is how high branded websites are. 70%. That's saying people trust information they see on websites even more than what they see in trade publications, and almost at the same level of recommendations. What's your reaction to that?
Well, Steve, if you think about earned media, there's been kind of a collision course going with earned and owned media. Think about like advertorials, for example. So when you're reading an article, people have kind of come to realize that you can't always know what the source of that article came from or how valid or neutral that information is. When you get to a website, though, you know it's from the company, about the company. You really understand the point of which this content's coming from, so you can feel confident at least in knowing that the information, the purpose of it, really.
So if we look at the top business challengers and marketers, or how do we build market share, how do we increase awareness, loyalty, counter the competition, and this is clearly showing that websites as a core part of the marketing mix and lead generation is not going away anytime soon. While social media is important, you just can't Twitter your way to successful leads is what this is telling me. So Mike, one last bit of research here to get our audience grounded here today. This is some interesting research conducted by Google. And I guess this makes sense when you think about corporate decision-making, lead generation, that nearly half of all B2B researchers are millennials, that even though they're not sitting in the C-suite, these B2B researchers, these millennials, are having an impact in determining who does or who doesn't get in the short list from that standpoint. So I guess it makes sense that senior management is assigning researchers. So how do we decide how to structure content for the website? Should it be structured for helping the senior executives make the decision, or should it be structured to making it easier for the researchers conducting the due diligence on behalf of the C-suite?
So I would go with a little bit of both. Obviously, it's very important that the final decision makers have all the information that they need. But what this kind of research tells me is that we need to assist the people who are engaging in the process early on to find all that information that they need. Usually, that process is going to start with some kind of a checklist to prepare for what will eventually be their short list recommendations to the C-suite. So if they're starting out as younger people, perhaps, maybe new to the industry, maybe new to some of the technology, they're going to be actually starting out with more general search process, which we see here. The third bullet point, 71% are starting with a generic search. It's also not at all surprising then that the average number of searches is about 12 before they're engaging with a website, because they're trying different ways of structuring their content search query in order to find exactly what they're looking for. A
Well,
side note to that is that it's possible that they're not finding what they need within the search results as well, and that may be a reflection on the type of content that's available for search.
so would a generic search be something like, I want a hot air balloon, and would it target
Plastics.
To connect, please. You will now read.
For one thing.
Mm-hmm. And then the last bit I thought was kind of interesting here, and I know you're going to get into this in terms of talking responsive design and different aspects like that, but this, I guess it's no surprise that more and more searches are being done on mobile. But what about this point of nearly 70% of B2B buyers say they're watching videos? Most of the sites I see have very little video unless they're consumers. So what should our audience take away from these 2 points?
Well, I would start on the mobile side that more people are using mobile in general, so that's obviously very important, especially for our international attendees. Obviously, the role mobile plays can differ by region, but in many regions around the world, mobile's even more important than in the U.S. The second point on video, we've kind of turned into the GoPro generation now. People are used to video and shooting video on their own. We're used to the more grainy GoPro type video. So from a B2B perspective, the good news is you don't have to invest in high production videos in every case. There's definitely room for that. But it's possible now to produce video at a much cheaper cost and turn it around fairly quickly and get it up online where people would be looking for it.
Excellent, excellent. And again, I just want to remind those of you listening in on the webinar, you can go to the Q&A panel at any time and type a question in the queue that we will look at as we go through this. We will take questions throughout, and we do have a formal Q&A section at the end. But Mike, I believe you had some questions that you wanted to ask our attendees. You want to give us a little bit of information about this poll?
Sure, absolutely. So first question, I was curious to learn a little bit more from our attendees about is whether you have a written digital strategy. So why is it important? Even if it's in a simple online outline form, first and foremost, it kind of teases out initial assumptions. Sometimes you might have 4 or 5 different people in your department, and they may all have an idea of where they're going, but when you have a written strategy in place, it really forces everyone to get on the same page.
And we'll give everybody about 30 more seconds to complete this so we can get a final tally. But Mike, this is an interesting mix, at least that's current. About half of the folks online say they have a written digital strategy. About 20% said no. About 8% are working on it, and about 25% are not sure. Is that pretty typical that you're seeing across the different B2B clients that you're counseling?
Honestly, I would say probably not. The majority of people that we talk to, at least in the early stages, don't really have a written digital strategy. Most have a pretty good idea of where they're going, as I said, but sometimes it's a surprise when you have a team and realize that you thought you were all kind of on that same page, and you find out that, well, maybe not exactly where you thought you were.
That's really good insight, and then hopefully as we go through, Mike, you can talk about not just the importance of a written digital strategy overall, but then how those campaign strategies need to tie in, and then And then more specifically, how do all these things filter into the website so it's not just a repository of what the organization is doing, but it's something that really is an integral part of the sales process?
Absolutely, absolutely. The website should be more than just dumping ground of your printed brochures or any other pieces of content that you're not quite sure what to do with it.
So I think you had another question for our audience there as well as kind of a level setting, Mike.
Yeah, let's move on here. So the next question we were curious about is, where can your website use a tune-up? Our first option would be it's visually dated. That's something we often hear from people when they first call us, is they feel like visually the website could use a kind of a kick. For some, it's more about content. So either it's out of date, or it doesn't necessarily reflect where the company is today, or it might actually be more of an internal process-oriented issue where, for example, they may have an upcoming trade show and they just can't seem to get that content on the website in time to support that trade show.
And we are doing a forced ranking because I'm sure that there could be a number of you that may have moved your vote from one to the other, and we'll give you about another 30 seconds to address the where can your website use a tune-up. But right now it looks like the overriding aspect, Mike, is content. You know, how do I get that fresh content, or how do I produce it in a more meaningful way? And from your perspective, why do you think content is the most difficult part of just having a good active website that is bringing those leads in?
Well, Steve, I think it starts with the fact that content is really what you're trying to say about yourself, about your company, and that can be the biggest challenge. Coming up with a visually attractive website, as many companies have learned over the years, isn't so difficult anymore. It really comes down to, what is that content? What does it need to be? What does it need to say? And how can we position it in a way that it's going to work for us? So
yeah,
not surprised at all.
From my experience, when we look at, we've got a tie for third there in terms of visually dated, doesn't reflect corporate direction. You know, for most of the counseling I've done with clients, it doesn't reflect corporate direction. Usually that's more a matter of through different M&As or product changes. Those aspects of the corporate direction haven't been done on the website. And then from visually dated, I mean, maybe you can talk about that, Mike. We actually had a discussion with somebody a few days ago where you were talking about the importance of, if you want to be seen as a global player, the importance of looking like a global player.
Absolutely. So if you think about it, what from a brand perspective and that first impression that you get suggests that this company that you come to the website, here it is, this is the company. Does it reflect on that market-leading position that the company claims to be, or does it look like maybe that company hasn't touched it in 3 or 4 years? And what does that say about the company then?
Mm-hmm. So I know you're going to cover a lot about kind of tricks of the trade in terms of how to build, how to structure a site, those components, because strategically it is very important, going back to your first question. But let's also make sure as we talk through the webinar that we are addressing those tips and techniques about content, and then how do you play those out in terms of a broader campaign. And then tying to our theme, how do we use this as a workout to really shape up on those aspects?
You bet. So let's go ahead and dive into that. So as you can see, I kind of geeked out a little bit here on our Shape Up theme. But so from everything we've talked about, we need to be able to facilitate for people this idea of self-service so that they can find the information they need so that your company can be on the short list. So we're going to talk about building a program and then how we can leverage that further. one
And
area I want
Mike,
go ahead,
one of
Steve.
the things you said to me when we were talking about lean out for growth was this. It was using the example you talked about of fitness was kind of like weight loss. Weight loss starts in the kitchen, not in the gym. As you talk about activating your core, can you just cover that a little bit? How does that translate to the website?
Absolutely. So if you think about it, many people put a lot of focus time for weight loss into putting more time in cardio or whatever in the gym. But according to experts, it's really more about what you eat in the kitchen. When we think about activating a core platform that you can build from a marketing perspective where your website's concerned, I say that instead of building from the IT department, it's really built in the marketing department, the communications group. We can't necessarily defer to the tech guys and gals about our digital programs, and it's very easy to do. IT often is notorious for saying no. That's kind of what they do. However, the reality is that the core of the message and the story that you're trying to tell can't get lost, and it can't get buried underneath the trappings of technology. That's something that we have to maintain ownership over. Now, I'm not knocking the importance of technology. It's got to be there. We're going to talk a little bit about where technology pieces fit into this, but I think that's one of the most important things that we have to keep in mind as communicators. We can't defer the story to IT.
No, that makes a lot of sense.
So, I really got into the whole do this, not that theme, so you're going to see a lot of that here. I think one of the best places to start, and what you're going to see following this, is places that we can make an immediate impact on our website, low cost, low time to execute, and then from there we're going to back our way to the things that are going to take a little more time and effort. Because let's face it, senior management needs to see results. They want to see action. They want to see something happening. And so we've kind of structured the rest of this conversation based on that. And so here what we're showing is modern versus outdated. And we talked again a little bit about that visual impact that the website has. So if you're a technology business, and in many of the B2B clients that we work with and prospects we talk to are in the technology field. And if your website's broken, if there are links that are broken, if images are missing, what does that imply about the technology behind the product or service that you have to offer? It's an important thing to think about. If you're a market-leading company, I'm sorry, Steve, go ahead.
I was going to say, and so where would something like load times or things like that fall into modern versus outdated? Do you see big differences in load time, bandwidth requirements, things like that between modern and outdated designs?
Absolutely. So people expect a very fast experience. Your web pages should be loading in under 7 seconds, or people are not going to wait. On mobile devices, 7 seconds can turn into 15 or 16 seconds. And again, that's just not acceptable to today's environment.
So part of that base level bloat could just even be image sizes and things like that then?
Absolutely. And that's an area that you definitely will need to take a look at in kind of speeding up the website and toning it down. Load times is a critical factor. Much of that comes from your images, bloated code that may have been left on the page from previous iterations of design. All has to get cleaned out. So I would start with reviewing the website. You could do this even today. Within a few hours, you could probably find broken links, missing images, and any text that's clearly out of date. Maybe it's a trade show you participated in 6 months ago. Clean that up, and immediately you would make improvements to bringing your website a little bit up to date without necessarily requiring a complete redesign. And speaking of mobile, and obviously those load times that we discussed becomes really, really important here. But first and foremost, last year Google made search for mobile a key component of SEO ranking. So from that perspective, all websites at this point should be mobile optimized. More people are using mobile devices to search now than ever before. And then, as I mentioned, if you're in an international region, where mobile fits into this could be even more important than on desktop. So,
Mike, we had a question come in that as you're talking about mobile and desktop, is that the same as responsive design? And what should a manager who's not technically oriented, who's managing a web team, know about responsive design?
So mobile responsive is a higher level of mobile adaptation. So it recognizes the device specifically and provides different content in a different structure. So it's built to be tappable. Mobile friendly would be a very base minimum that all websites should be able to have. That means that it just fits within the screen and you can kind of see it, but it's not necessarily including tappable links. You may need to pinch and zoom a little bit to be able to read it. So again, mobile friendly would be that very, very basic minimum requirement. Mobile responsive would be far preferred, but if your website is not really mobile friendly currently or mobile responsive, it's going to require a rebuild in order to get you there. So I would go with mobile friendly as a minimum first step to try to see about cleaning up the load times, for example, and then think about mobile responsive as a requirement for your next redesign. Another component behind that as well is a little bit of what I think of as cardio endurance, and that is building out for the long haul. When you think about website content, which is now kind of the stage we're moving toward, there's two critical aspects. The first is having a content management platform that gives you the means to easily update content without requiring significant help from IT in order to execute. Again, if you think about that trade show that's coming up in 3 months, you want to be able to get support content up before the trade show starts rather than 2 months after it completed. The other aspect to this is content development as a process. So when you think about the content that you have on your site, is it current? We usually separate content into a couple of buckets. So the first bucket is evergreen content. It's the stuff that really doesn't change very often at all. And then we have the content that does need to change a little bit more frequently. And what we suggest is to creating a content calendar that allows you to map out first and foremost which pages are evergreen and you can kind of leave it versus the pages that need more frequent revisiting on a semi-regular schedule. Because if we don't have this process in place for revisiting this content, we're going to be back in Flabby land within, a few months to a year.
Hey, Mike, here's a question that came in. I'm sure this is pretty familiar with what you've seen. And it says, I'm fairly new at this company, about 6 months, and I've inherited a content management system that was created by a technology firm we no longer work with. What are your recommendations there? So it sounds like this person asking the question had what was fairly common a few years back, which is the creation of these more custom content management systems, and now it's a bit clunky to try and do the updates. What recommendations would you have for them?
Yeah, that's tricky, Steve, because depending on how well that system was built, it could be exposing you to security risk for a website becoming hacked and hijacked. We generally prefer to stick with well-known, established content management systems. WordPress is an obvious one. Magento is another. There's a bunch of them out there. Drupal. These are well-established. They're supported by the companies. They're supported by an entire community of third-party developers. So if your current group who is supporting your site suddenly is not, for whatever reason, is not suitable to your needs and you need to make a change, it's easy to find somebody who can support it as opposed to some of these bespoke one-off custom CMSs that you're kind of stuck with whomever built it in order to, keeping it up to date. Mm-hmm. So if we're at a point where we're needing to think about a CMS, if you don't have one, it's really important to have. I would definitely consider it as a must for your next rebuild. This would be a good point to reassess whether your site needs a brand facelift. And, of course, don't forget that mobile optimized build. We want it mobile responsive. It should be built into the fabric of the site so that it renders in a proper way across the devices. So when you kind of pull all those things together, a site redesign may be necessary. Be sure to hit on those 3 points. The last part of this kind of core competency, if you will, is tracking and reporting. So we tend to see two extremes often with different companies. Either they're reporting on everything or they're reporting on nothing. And both have different challenges. If you're reporting on everything, it's kind of analysis paralysis, and it creates what I think of as report blindness, in that nobody pays attention to the reports. It's not telling you anything useful. It's not going to be looked at. People will look at the first couple and say, well, that's interesting or that's nice, but then they move on, and then that's it. And they won't look at your future reports. Again, tracking nothing is not helpful to anyone either. So what do? Let's track what's useful. Start out with something that you do know you have a question about and report on that. So if you decide to run a banner ad campaign, why not track what traffic came into the site from that banner ad campaign, what they did once they got there, and then decide from there whether that banner campaign was actually worthwhile or not. Again, so we should focus on what matters to the business.
So as you think about tracking and analytics, Mike, how do you determine which ones best fit or support your lead flow, or how do you decide which analytics you may want to give to the sales organization versus senior management versus maybe the chief communications officer at a company? Do you pull different reports for different people, and then how does that support really evolving that lead generation process?
I would definitely do different reports. Show only the things that are really useful to that particular group. So if you start with sales, what do they need to know? Generally, how many people are coming in and what kind of content are they interested in? It might imply where salespeople might need to be focusing. So let's say you offer 5 specific products on your website. Let's say that 80% of the traffic coming into the website are all looking at one particular product. That might tell something to the salespeople that they might want to think about in terms of how they're going out and talking to people. At the C level, it could be a very different thing, like where traffic's coming from regionally. That may suggest that they need a physical location in the western part of the U.S. because they had no office there, and suddenly they're getting a big uptick in terms of traffic.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I would call those elements that we just talked about your core. If you got all those things more or less in place, you'd be in a very, very good position. Now let's move on to what it would take to get Olympian fit. I kind of got into the Olympics, so let's talk about the heavy lifting now, Steve. So it starts with a plan, and actually, in a perfect world, we would start here. But in most cases, well, most websites are up. Many marketers, many communicators are inheriting what may be existing. They need a place to start. They need to be able to, again, show senior management some movement. And so we kind of structured it around the core first. And now we get into a point, hopefully, where we've bought ourselves a little breathing room. So let's define, what does success look like? And, you know, you asked the question about reporting and what it should be for whom, starting with, what does this vision look like in terms of success? If we don't really sit down and write that digital strategy out, we're going to be stuck in this right-hand column where we're kind of going to have a mishmash of stuff that's all over the place. So we want to define working. And I use the word working in this case because it's the keyword I hear the most when I talk to prospects. They say, it's just not working, or it's just not right. So what does that mean? And I don't know, Steve, maybe you've heard the same thing too. But it just seems to be the most common question when it comes to talking about websites in general.
Yeah, and I have a lot of empathy for those that have responsibility for corporate websites or product websites that, you know, it seems like they fall into a couple of different pressure points. You know, one is almost trying to turn the website into a corporate brochure. Oh, we've got that. We've got to get that out there, which can be a very inward-looking thing. The other is, and I don't want to call it dismissive because that's not fair to some of the marketers, but, you know, these extensive launch plans have been built out, and then it's like, oh, yeah, we got to get something out on the website. By the way, this launches in a couple of days. So you've got the challenge of, and again, maybe the plan addresses this, but the challenge of the website being internally focused versus customer or sales focused on the one hand. The second is a lack of appreciation in terms of what really goes into, hey, get something up on the website.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, usually when I push prospects on this, it usually comes back to sales at some point. It may have other areas of communication as well as a key point, but it often falls back to, at least at the C level in particular, sales. So how do we get there? How can we turn the website into something that's just more than that mishmash of content? And I go back to the old-fashioned sales marketing funnel for this. You know, we've got awareness, interest, decision, action. If we think about how we put content together to facilitate people's movement through the process, then we can enable them to self-serve, find the information they're looking for, and in a format that they need to see it. So I'll give you an example of what I mean here. We did an audit for a supplier of a hardscaping materials, you know, backyard stuff, pavers, and so forth. The website had a whole host of product information, and it was complete in that it had dimensions, weight, material density, and all that. But when I come to the next question, which is this easy to install? If I want to build a paved path from my deck to my back gate, for example, how much material would I need for that? We didn't find that information easily within that specific product listed page. So I back out to the top level navigation and I start poking around, and I can't necessarily find what I'm looking for even there. If that's the case, what happens is people are forced to go back to the search engine and retry their search results. So we're losing out on a potential opportunity. I mean, that company had some really good how-to videos for installation, but it was on YouTube. Now, they didn't even have a YouTube link on the website. So that's a missed opportunity. And when you think about content and you think about framework and structuring, and planning. This is the process that you need to work through in order to think it through from the user perspective and share it in a way that's meaningful to them, rather than, as you mentioned, this kind of inside-out thinking where we're building it based on our internal corporate structure.
So, Mike, as you look at the sales, obviously awareness throws it out broad. You build a good site that the search engine's fine. You may use banners, different things to bring them in. That addresses the awareness. The content that you create on the site, and using the hardscape example you just did, if you can make it easy for them to see how they fit in, certainly that could play into consideration, decisions, those type of things. What about loyalty? How can a website help loyalty? Isn't that just something your sales force does?
No, although the sales force does, depending on your business, play a major role there. What we can do to encourage loyalty is to remind people of, there's a couple things. First would be to remind them that the purchase decision they made was a good one. So reinforcing that with user reviews, for example, inviting somebody once they've completed the installation of that product to come in and write a review might be a great way to reminding them of why they made the right choice in buying your product. So, I mean, that's just one way of reiterating that. I think social media and emails are also great for continuing to reach out to our existing customer base and, you know, again, reminding them new products that we're coming up with, new ways of using products, maintaining that top of mind awareness so that the next time that they decide to do a hardscaping project, that they'll come back to us. Now, something I also wanted to talk a little bit about, Steve, that I think is really important is that this idea that nobody reads anymore. I think in many ways this notion that nobody reads anymore has kind of influenced how we think about marketing materials on a website. The bottom line is that often there just isn't enough information. There's not enough information for search engines to be able to evaluate what a web page is about and where it should rank in the hierarchy of search. Remember, only one web page can rank number one for any given keyword. But also, people get stuck in this overall buyer journey because they can't find the answers to the questions they're looking for. They want self-service. They don't want to have to contact you to find out what it is, answer-wise to their question. So what they tend to do is, again, they back out of the process. So if you think about this journey, the purchase path is definitely not linear. And so many people have, or many marketers have moved away from the whole funnel idea based on that fact. But the truth is there's detours and roadblocks throughout. And ironically, we've either created them or at least we haven't eliminated them. So that should be the focus from our content development purpose. How do we eliminate detours and roadblocks? So a detour would be content that's not in line with our purchase path. So again, there's a great video on how to install this product, but it's not here where I'm at. I got to go somewhere else and hope I find it. But I might in the process find somebody else's, a competitor's example of how to install a product. Maybe it's an epoxy that goes into a material product that sells to consumers. So regardless of that, we need to answer that question.
Yeah, Mike, we've got a question in here about marketing automation. So as you give your website a tune-up, how do you need to think about Salesforce and Eloqua or other tools in having your website play more than a role of just awareness, to really kind of tying into these different points? So what kind of advice do you have about, one, how to make sure it's linked, and then second, how a typical process would work trying to get Salesforce integrated in with a website?
Sure. So I would actually start in an area that may surprise people, and that is before you even think about automating your marketing, you have to understand what the process flow actually should be. So what marketing automation does is, again, it automates pieces, it automates processes. But what is that email that we need to put together at a particular point within this user flow that would help move people along? What landing page might we need, and what should that content look like that would help people move along? Those are the questions we need to start with. So before you go investing in marketing automation software, start thinking about this process. Start outlining what it might look like for a general user. At some point, you may find yourself creating segments of different user paths for different target audiences. But even at a high level, start out with, what does this process in general look like? Once you've nailed that down, you can start to say, okay, so if I believe that I have this hypothesis of this process, now what are those touch points that will tell me if my path is in fact correct? We call these micro conversions. This is very important in the B2B space, where you're not selling something to somebody right now. Nobody's going to buy a ton of paving material immediately just by looking at the website. What they're going to need instead is a little time to digest. They're going to go back to their team. They're going to talk about it, and the process eventually will get to the point where they're ready to make a decision. So what are those micro conversion touch points that we can share that would, A, tell us that the journey is correct, people are converting at this point? Maybe it's a download, maybe it's a sign up for a newsletter. It also turns this anonymous hit or page view into an actual human being. They're saying, hey, my name's Tom Jones, I'm interested in your newsletter. And then enables... Go ahead,
to
Steve.
that point, we had a question about, do you recommend using contact forms on sites, or is it better to send them to a tailored email address? Didn't mean to interrupt you, but that seemed to be right on point with where you were going there.
Sure. I generally would prefer forms because you have a little more control over them. You can ask some additional questions that could be the lead-in to that sales process, and also you can identify where people might be falling out. So if it's a 5-step question process form, you may find that 80% are bailing out at point number 3. That could be telling in terms of what this whole journey looks like for your customers, and might tell you how you might need to adapt to better fit within their flow. So again, when we're thinking about the purchase path, we want to position our content in front of people where they're at, where they're going, assist or facilitate in moving through this process, eliminate roadblocks that are content that's not digestible, or it's just not inviting to read. A video, if it's 25 minutes in length and we're dropping it on them and auto playing it when they arrive on the page, and they may not be prepared for that, that might be a real turnoff and cause them to leave. So we want to think through that process, understand what that journey is, and then validate it again with the metrics necessary. And that's where marketing automation can really start to help. So as you start building out this process, the marketing automation can help you track it in a way that's bigger and better than just your standard web analytics. And so you can observe where people are falling out, what the whole stitched together process looks like, including email, including ads. So it's going outside of even just the website, and pulling it together in a way that tells you who this person is and what it is that they really want. Now you can start one-to-one marketing with them, and your sales team can kind of get started on getting after these leads and building these relationships. So I guess to sum up then, Steve, before we get into the Q&A here, what we're looking at is starting out with that core. It's an area that almost any website can use a start at. Companies can get going on this today, limbering up by refreshing the brand, repairing broken links, getting after those images, compressing files, speeding up that site response, ensuring that there's at least a mobile friendliness to it, if not true mobile responsiveness, and then thinking about what that content process should look like before we start getting into the heavier lifting. And again, that gets into what is our plan? What is our idea of what growth needs to look like? And then framing that content outline according to the customer journey. Where did people need to see content? What questions do they have? What answers can we give? What format does it need to be in? And then from there, just kind of building that out, and possibly looking at further segmenting the audience, because not in every case, it's not one size fits all. You may find that you have 2 or 3 segments. In some cases, I see where personas are built out, 50 personas for a company. That's a little excessive. That can be very difficult to manage content for all 50 different persona types. It's best to keep it within a manageable flow. Think about what content can we produce. If you're niching so much that you've got 50 different variations, that can be, again, very, very tricky.
Well, Mike, in a case like that with so many personas, should you try and cram all that into one site, or would you do a better job creating specialty sites, or would you really use kind of your key navigation to steer those audiences, or is it just too much?
Ideally, focusing on a fewer segments, not trying to niche it down. Chances are that 50 personas is probably more than is actually reality. From a brand perspective, you're best off usually sticking with one site and working the navigation to help guide users to the information that they want. There's a variety of different benefits to this. SEO is one of them. SEO is more today about brand than it is about keyword niching. So 10 years ago, where you would have been better off creating multiple microsites, one for each area of your business or focus point. Today, it's really better that you have this consolidated into one site. User experience-wise, it's less confusing. So if they're at a search engine and they're seeing 3 or 4 different websites that all have your brand and your name on it, then they're not sure which one that matters to them, which one is the real company website. So I would lean toward that.
That makes sense. We have a number of questions coming in. Just a reminder to everybody to go ahead and fill out a question if you have it. All questions remain private, so you're not going to see that in that box in the lower left-hand corner. Mike, we've got a question here, which is basically, should a written digital strategy shape what we put in terms of content, or should it be bigger picture thinking?
Great question. Wow. Yes, I think start with the bigger picture. This is where you want to go. This is what you're trying to accomplish. This is what you're going to share with the C-level next year that says, you know, we deserve our budget, or maybe hopefully a little bit more. They're probably not going to be as interested in all the little detail. However, your marketing team, your communications group may need some of that detail. So I would start with that high level first, and then start to break it down into specific tactical activities and how it ties back into that overarching strategy.
So here's a question about coding. And basically it says, hey, Mike, how much basic coding should I know, or are today's CMSs intuitive enough that as a PR pro I can do it myself?
Most modern current CMSs don't require any coding at all, and so you should be fine without needing that component. However, unfortunately, some companies have legacy CMSs that may require that you actively get into the code to fix details, and so there's a possibility, and it depends on your company and it depends on your website, where you fall in there. I would say if you are in that position where you do have to code things and that's not your forte, find somebody who could be your best friend who does know how to code and buy them a cup of coffee and ask for a little bit of help. In most cases, you're not having to learn a complete development. It's usually little tweaks like how do I ensure that the active link is a true link to where I want it to go, for example. It's usually little things like that that you could learn within, 2 hours.
We've got another question here, Mike. I've heard about UX testing or user experience testing, as well as A/B testing. What is your recommendation here in terms of identifying not just what content is most interested in, but actually pushing a lead through the sales funnel?
Sure. So UX testing is a great way of understanding what it is that people want from your website, and what you're doing there is there's a variety of different tests that can be executed at different stages of the website depending on where you're at, whether your site is in design right now versus whether you're thinking about a redesign maybe in a few months or what have you, and you're looking for where you should prioritize. You can conduct user tests to define whether the navigation labeling makes sense, what the hierarchy of the site should be structured around, what content they may be most interested in. If you leverage that with A/B testing or split testing, that gives you the opportunity to share actual content to users where you're showing a version A. Let's say it's a headline. You could try one approach to a headline and then serve half of your audience with another version of it where everything else would be the same, and see how people react to that headline. So at a very high level, you could do a general test of the website to see redesign-wise, do people like the blue layout with the left-hand navigation versus the gray layout with the top across navigation, down to very specific nitty-gritty, like should the hero image include our president here, or should it be our VP of sales here? That might generate more interest or response. You can build that into the process. When we talked about endurance and building for the long haul, this is a great way of understanding whether your content's in line with what people want, because behaviorally they'll tell you through their clicks.
Mike, it looks like we have time for about one more question. So the one I'm going to tee up for you here last is, in my organization, the website is thought of something that communicators do. How do I ensure closer alliance with our sales and marketing team? So my interpretation of that question is how do I convince the organization that this isn't just communications, that this is a critical part of the business?
Well, that's a great question. It would depend a little bit on your organization, because we're kind of getting into the realm of politics. One area you can start with is the sales group, and talk to them about how they're getting leads, how the lead quality looks, and offer to help them. Most salespeople will not say no to getting better qualified leads, kind of a bottom line. They're always struggling with that. Or how can you help them to nurture leads along, or maintain that top of mind awareness so that they're calling you back the next time they need what it is that you have to offer. Another area you can go to is the C-suite. Quite frankly, they're always about sales and proving out whether you're contributing to profit or reducing the costs on the bottom line. So they could be kind of a champion to your cause as well.
And I do think that's an area to the person that asked the question is you don't have to rebuild the entire site to best support that. You can start small, you can start targeted and work from that standpoint and demonstrate the business case. So Mike, thank you very much for being with us here today to really talk about how we can activate the core, some of those basic things that most of the attendees today could really do to just get that base level fitness of their website up. And then what are the things that they need to think about in terms of getting strong? And a lot of it does come down to having a detailed strategy, a written strategy, a framework that you can work from. Make sure you're getting that distraction. And as we saw from those that participated in the polls, content, content, and more content. So thank you again for joining the webinar. We will be providing a link to all 3 webinars here shortly coming out of these conferences. If you do have questions specific to website and how to lean it out, please feel free to reach out to Mike. His contact information is there. If you have a broader question about this series, website, social media, or overall business strategy, please feel free to give me a call as well. Thank you very much for joining us here today. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone.